This is message number 5, section C in my Endtime Babylon series. It's entitled America's Wealth and Worship of Money. The last message was entitled Endtime Babylon's Wealth and Worship of Money. If God is expecting us to recognize the fulfillment of this biblical prophecy in our lifetime, then we need to discuss the title of this message, America's Wealth and Worship of Money. And in the process, I believe the primary point of this message will be demonstrated as well. America is the most reasonable interpretation of the clearest descriptions of what biblical prophecy predicts about end-time Babylon. In fact, no other interpretation even comes close. I think I'll be able to demonstrate that. I realize that may be a shocking statement for some. I realize also that some may be skeptical of that conclusion, but I'm asking you to join me in humbly, carefully, and even courageously studying this prophetic scripture here. The last message clearly demonstrated the following 5 attributes predicted for end-time Babylon. Let's look at those. 1, it will be the economic superpower of the world possessing great wealth, Revelation 18:17, when the end times begin. 2nd, its international businessmen will be the world's important people, Revelation 18:23. 3rd, it will be the foremost consumer and importer of material goods in the world because all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth, Revelation 18:19. 4th, its people will be living in extravagant luxury, Revelation 18:3. 5th, it will be the world's foremost example and promoter of the worship of money because all the nations will have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries, Revelation 18:3. Based on these biblical characteristics, the remainder of this message will argue what should be obvious. America is the most reasonable application of the clearest descriptions of what biblical prophecy predicts about end-time Babylon. Let us look at first predicted attribute number 1 here. America is the economic superpower of the world possessing great wealth. In fact, America is a historical phenomenon that surpasses any nation or people who have ever lived on this earth. The level of prosperity in America far exceeds anything experienced in history or anywhere else in the world today. This becomes especially clear when we realize that America possesses only 4% of the world's population. Keep that in mind as we discuss the economic, military, and cultural power of America in this message and the next one. Of course, America has by far the most powerful conventional military in the world, something that I will discuss further in the next message. But its truly unique and greatest domination in the world is based on its overwhelmingly superior wealth. Honestly, it's difficult for most Americans to understand how superior they are to the entire rest of the world when it comes to financial wealth. But the following will attempt to illustrate this. For example, in a report on global wealth, the respected Pew Research Center states the following, quote, "How does the economic well-being of the American family compare with the well-being of people in other countries? On a global scale, the vast majority of Americans are either upper middle income or high income, and many Americans who are classified as poor by the U.S. government would be middle income globally," unquote. The report goes on to say the U.S. stands head and shoulders above the rest of the world in wealth. More than half, 56% of Americans were high income by the global standard, the highest of incomes. Another 30%, 32% were upper middle income. In other words, almost 9 in 10, 88% of Americans had a standard of living that was above the global middle income standard. Only 7% of people in the U.S. were middle income, 3% were low income, and only 2% were poor in terms of global standard for wealth in America. Compare that with the rest of the world, where 13% of the people globally could be considered middle income. And this describes much of Europe, by the way, which we'll see in a moment. Most people in the world were either low income, 56% of the world, or poor, 15%. And relatively few were upper middle income, 9%, or high income, 7%. That's the rest of the world. Given the much higher standard of living in the U.S., the report goes on to say, what is considered poor here in America is a level of income still not available to most people globally. This means that many Americans who are poor by the U.S. standard would be middle income by the global standard, unquote. How different is America from the rest of the world when it comes to a relative global scale of wealth? 56% of Americans are at the highest category of income in the world. But at the same percentage, 50% 56% of the rest of the world's population is at the lowest income level, the poorest. Only 7% of non-Americans are high income in the world. Likewise, 56% of the world's people are poor by a global standard. Only 2% of Americans are. And many Americans still complain about not having enough money. That is the world's ultimate example of the idolatrous attitude of Endtime Babylon towards money. All of these statistics include Europe, which can be described as primarily, quote, middle income compared to America. Accordingly, in another Pew Research study, we read, quote, overall, regardless of how middle-class fortunes are analyzed, the material standard of living in the U.S. is estimated to be significantly better than in most Western European countries examined. For example, it is estimated that the per capita income in France is only 67% of the level in the U.S., unquote. The above explains why the Washington Post reported that, quote, the United States was surprisingly close to having 99% of its population make up the wealthiest 1% of all people in the entire world. That's amazing. There are over 20 million people in the U.S. who are millionaires. In 2019 alone, America added well over 2 million more millionaires to its population. That means a country with 4% of the world's population has about 1/3 of the estimated 59 million millionaires in the world. This means you are 12 times or 1,200% more likely to be a millionaire in America than the rest of the entire world. America is ranked far ahead of any other country in gross domestic product, which is essentially money power. In 2021, GDP in the U.S. was about $23 trillion. This is $5 trillion more than the combined 27 countries of the entire European Union, which was about $17 trillion. In fact, America's GDP is almost 25% of the total $94 trillion of GDP for the whole world. And that is with a population of only about 335 million people, or 4% of the world. That equals about $70,000 of GDP per every man, woman, and child in the United States. China is second in GDP, producing about $17 trillion in 2021. But this is with a population of over 1.4 billion people. That equals $12,000 per person. In other words, Americans produce about 600 times more wealth than the people in China, the nation with the second highest GDP. And it should be noticed that a primary reason for any wealth in China is because Americans purchase their material goods more than any other country by far. The national debt of America exposes its worship of money. It is estimated to be about $32 trillion now. I just noticed that the other day in a news report. And that is almost $100,000 per every man, woman, and child in America. Its national debt is worth more than the combined material goods and services of the next 4 countries with the highest GDPs in the world, which are China, Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom. In 2021, the United States spent over $1.5 billion per day to just cover the interest payment on its debt. Of course, many people have warned that for many years that such a large debt will cause the United States economy to collapse, but no evidence supports that. America crossed the $1 trillion mark of debt in 1981. Since then, it has amassed $32 trillion of debt. Has the American economy or Americans' lifestyle suffered in any way from over 40 years of over $1 trillion in debt? Not at all. On the contrary, during that tremendous surge in debt over more than 40 years, America's economic prosperity and power over the world has greatly increased. And there's no end in sight for America's capacity to accumulate debt. Foreign countries still view America as a valuable investment. Therefore, when the U.S. issues bonds to increase its debt, there are always more foreign buyers than bonds available. Export and import prices and the fact that the American dollar is the standard currency of the world and international trade all contribute to America's ability to be $32 trillion in debt and still be by far the most prosperous country in the world. The American people enjoy all the things spent on this borrowed money. What other nation in the world can borrow that much money? Only the United States of America. And its financial debt is $30 or $32 trillion because it is by far the most powerful economic nation in the world and by far the greatest worshiper of money in the world. When Revelation chapter 17 through 18 clearly describes end-time Babylon as the world's economic superpower and the foremost worshiper of wealth, when the end times begin, American Christians should take serious notice of this. Again, America's wealth is why the beast Antichrist would hate the spiritual prostitute of America and permanently remove all people from her and burn her down with fire, Revelation 17:16. Its wealth is currently the most powerful religion in the world and would hinder the Antichrist from being fully worshipped himself. The best way to destroy America's wealth and its ability to spread the idolatrous religion of money around the world would be to destroy the people and place of America. So again, American Christians should take notice. Let's look at a second attribute. In Revelation 18:23, we have another definitive statement about the identity of end-time Babylon. It says, "Your international businessmen were the world's important people." This clearly fits America better than any other place in the world and any other place in human history. Again, America has only 4% of the world's population, but 65%, or 13 of 20, of the most powerful and wealthy businessmen in the world are from America. The names of these people are certainly among the world's most important people, the foremost celebrities in the business realm on earth. They are so powerful that even in popular culture, their names and businesses are known by the vast majority of the world's population. These men and their names include Elon Musk from Tesla, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Warren Buffett of Berkshire Hathaway, Bill Gates of Microsoft, Michael Bloomberg of Bloomberg Corporation, Steve Ballmer of Microsoft, Larry Page of Google, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, and Jim Walton of Walmart. When the prophecy in Revelation chapter 17 through 18 identifies end-time Babylon with the statement, "Your international businessmen were the world's important people," we have very good reasons to believe it is referring to the United States of America. A third attribute is that end-time Babylon will be the world's foremost consumer and importer of material goods, and that certainly fits America again. In Revelation 18:17, we read that all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. Likewise, it says the international businessmen who sold these things to end-time Babylon gained their wealth from her. Revelation 18:15. These things refer to a list of 28 items that end-time Babylon will be purchasing and have shipped from around the world. Most of the items listed were luxuries in the ancient world and continue to be so today. Many think the list only refers to ancient commerce, but the relationship between American imports and the specific list of goods in Revelation 18 is remarkable. In the book, I have a table illustrating this. And we can conclude from that modern America is the world's foremost importer of silver, fine linen, ivory, marble, cinnamon, frankincense, wine, and even chariots. It is the second largest importer of perfume, olive oil, cattle, and horses, things listed in Revelation chapter 18, 12 through 13 that are being imported by end-time Babylon. Accordingly, America is the world's largest importer of goods, followed by China and Germany. And again, virtually all of these items are brought to American ships traveling across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Like end-time Babylon is described in biblical prophecy, America is the most important trading partner in the world, and especially of countries who trade by sea. The prophecy also states that end-time Babylon will be a place where human beings are also imported into the country and sold as slaves, Revelation 18:13. This could certainly refer to America's sinful history as a foremost importer of slaves from Africa. But this could also refer to the many sex slaves being brought into America today. The U.S. State Department recently estimated that perhaps up to 50,000 women and girls are imported into America for sex trafficking every year. That is modern-day slavery. One sex trafficking expert was quoted by Fox News and said, quote, "The United States is the #1 consumer of sex worldwide, so we are driving the demand as a society," unquote. Indeed, America is a place where human beings continue to be imported into the country and sold as slaves, just as Revelation 18 predicted. The biblical prophecy about end-time Babylon clearly describes it as the world's foremost consumer and importer of material goods. Therefore, American Christians should take notice. A fourth attribute that we derived from Revelation chapter 17 through 18 about end-time Babylon was its luxurious living. And we're making the point here that America's luxurious living is the greatest in the world and in all of human history. All of America's superior wealth, material consumption, and imports of goods result in a luxurious lifestyle that is unparalleled in the world today and unprecedented in human history. One just needs to travel to places like Africa, India, Russia, and Latin America to recognize America almost feels like a different planet in terms of its prosperity. It is estimated that the 4% of the world's population that lives in America enjoys about 25% of the world's entire wealth. Likewise, although America makes up 4% of the world's population, its people consume about 25% of the world's coal, oil, and natural gas. Most Americans do not realize how rare it is to even have your own lawn of grass to mow. This is just one of a multitude of examples of the stark difference between what has been called the first world problems in America and third world problems just about everywhere else. One popular resource on this issue claims, quote, if you keep your food in a refrigerator and your clothes in a closet and sleep in a bed and have a roof over your head, you are richer than 75% of the people living in the world today. Much of America's luxuries come from the millions of workers who are practically slaves in the poorest countries of the world. Many of those people work 12 to 14 hours a day for a few dollars an hour, manufacturing material goods and products for Americans. When the prophecy in Revelation 17 through 18 predicts end-time Babylon will be a place and a people who pursue desires for extravagant luxury, Revelation 18:3, lived in luxury, verse 7, enjoyed her great luxury, verse 9, and loved fancy things so much, verse 14, then we should not ignore how this uniquely describes America. Or as stated in the primary point of this message, America is the most reasonable interpretation, the clearest descriptions of what biblical prophecy predicts about end-time Babylon. A fifth attribute that we talked about earlier was that end-time Babylon will be the world's foremost example and promoter of the worship of money. This certainly fits the United States of America in a unique way. Now, there is nothing automatically sinful about America's wealth. It is the result of God's blessing on the greatest Christian nation that has ever existed in human history. God's supernatural blessing is the only reasonable explanation. Supernatural blessing is the only reasonable explanation for why 4% of the people on the earth are so much more prosperous than any other nation in the world. But what makes their wealth so sinful is that Americans increasingly love, trust, crave, and worship their wealth more than the living God. And they promote these same adulterous values all over the world. This is precisely what end-time Babylon was predicted to do. As noted above, the human passion for prosperity, possessions, and pleasures that money can buy is what will make the pursuit and worship of money the intoxicating wine that all the nations will have drunk from end-time Babylon. At the beginning of the end times, end-time Babylon will be the foremost example and promoter of the idolatrous religion of money. No other nation in all of human history has promoted the power and worship of money like America. In the foreword to his very good book, An Empire of Wealth, author J.S. Gordon writes this, quote, throughout time, from ancient Rome to modern Britain, the great empires built and maintained their domination through force of arms and political power, but not the United States of America. America has dominated the world in a new, peaceful, and pervasive way through the continued creation of staggering wealth, unquote. Which is why the whole world envies America's wealth and is passionately pursuing what is commonly called the American dream. This is simply the idolatrous religion of economic prosperity. And America has enticed the world to pursue that same idolatrous dream as well. Other nations have certainly been blatantly evil, but they have not influenced the world in the more sinister and subtle evil of idolatry like America. Likewise, the popular American saying, quote, the pursuit of the almighty dollar, unquote, describes the religion of money. One resource notes, quote, almighty dollar is an idiom often used to satirize obsession with material wealth, or with capitalism in general. The phrase implies that money is a kind of deity, unquote. Countries like China and India may deny it, but they greatly envy America's economic power and are straining with all their might to imitate America in its pursuit of the almighty dollar instead of the almighty God. America is the foremost force today and in all of human history in convincing the world that money instead of God should be the primary pursuit of humanity. That is one of the clearest and repeated things Endtime Babylon was predicted to do in Revelation chapter 17 through 18, and it is what America has done like no one else ever. The fact that America is the world's foremost example and promoter of the worship of money is demonstrated by another fact. America is the greatest source of advertising in the world. As explained in a previous message, money will be Endtime Babylon's religion, and marketing will be the evangelism of that religion in the world. Therefore, it is important to notice that America is the greatest source of advertising in the world by far. In 2022, American businesses spent about $480 billion in advertising. It was noted above that the entire world spent over $600 billion. That means with 4% of the world's population, America spent about 80% of the advertising money in the world. This is one reason that virtually all of the most influential advertising agencies in the world are located in New York City. If advertising is evangelism for the anti-God world and the worship of money, then America is the Billy Graham of the religion of money in the world. America is the first people and place in human history to match the worldwide influence that is predicted of end-time Babylon. As noted, America is a unique historical phenomenon that surpasses any nation or people who have ever lived on this earth. The level of economic wealth, influence, and prosperity in America far exceeds anything experienced in history or anywhere else in the world today. Some have suggested that many entities in history could have fulfilled the predictions of end-time Babylon in Revelation chapter 17 through 18. That simply is not true for several reasons, some of which will be pointed out in the next message. But one reason becomes clear in this message. The economic power and influence predicted for end-time Babylon has never been matched by any people or place in all of human history until America. No other empire or nation has even come close. In all of human history, it can only be said of America, all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. As New Testament scholar Thomas notes, quote, "The harlot has committed fornication with all levels of society, from the kings of the earth to the rest of the earth's inhabitants. The Babylonian system gains international influence and even domination," unquote. When something influences all the nations on earth, in even a small way, it is an unprecedented force in the world. For the first time in human history, only America's influence in our world can certainly be described in this way. In fact, before the emergence of America, it would seem difficult to suggest historical candidates for a physical fulfillment of Revelation chapter 17 through 18. It is perhaps only because America exists that these prophecies make any sense at all. What other place and people in all of human history besides America could be described with the economic power predicted for end-time Babylon? In all of human history and for the foreseeable future, such worldwide attributes could only be said of modern America. Accordingly, Bible scholar Stephen Anderson rightly concludes, quote, "The United States is the greatest economic superpower that the world has ever seen. It is the only entity in the history of the world that has made the entire world wealthy. It is by far the country with the greatest luxury and material comfort of any in the world's history. And it has far more control over the economies of other countries than has any other entity in history. America alone of any country in history matches the description of Babylon the Great in Revelation 17 through 18, and it matches the description so clearly as to leave no doubt that it is the entity referenced," unquote. In summary, the primary case for interpreting the prophecy in Revelation 17 through 18 to refer to America is that the clearest descriptions of end-time Babylon include, 1, it will be the economic superpower of the world, possessing great wealth when the end times begin. 2, its international businessmen will be the world's important people. 3, it will be the foremost consumer and importer of material goods in the world because all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. 4, its people will be living in extravagant luxury that the rest of the world will envy and desire for themselves. 5th, It will be the world's foremost example and promoter of the worship of money, because all the nations will have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. America is by far the clearest example of all of these things. This is true of all of human history. It is true now, and this will be true for the foreseeable future. In fact, if God intended to predict and describe 21st century American prophetic scripture, it is difficult to imagine how he could have described it more clearly. No other interpretation of these prophecies makes sense in light of America's economic attributes and effects in this world. Accordingly, it seems the primary point of this message has been demonstrated. America is the most reasonable interpretation of the clearest descriptions of what biblical prophecy predicts about end-time Babylon. And there are 6 more attributes of end-time Babylon described in Scripture that uniquely match America. That will be the topic of my next message.